Good afternoon. This is Calvin Anderson from the Student Empowerment Program. I'm so pleased to be able to interview Senator Floyd Mc Kissick Jr. Senator McKissick, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've served in the North Carolina Senate going on 13 years now. Represent Senate District 20, which is Durham County. Previously served 8 years on City Council, 5 years or so on the Board of Adjustment, Durham Planning Commission. Educationally, I got my undergraduate degree at Clark University, Worcester, Massachusetts. Went on to get a master's degree in City and Regional Planning, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, in the School of City and Regional Planning. Worked for several years before getting my master's in Public Administration from Harvard University. Followed my law degree at Duke University. In addition to serving in North Carolina Senate, I've been an attorney practicing law in the state of North Carolina now for about 35 years.
Senator McKissick, your family has been legacy when it comes to understanding and participating in leadership when it comes to voting rights in North Carolina. We would like for you to help social studies students in middle school and high school to understand how to approach social studies today when it comes to voting rights and voter identification.
Well, I think the important thing is to understand that everybody has a constitutional right in this country to exercise the privilege to vote. The only thing they need to do is to be 18 years of age to vote. They can actually pre-register before 18 years of age. I think the obstacles to voting today are not what they would have been back in the 60s. You don't have things like literacy tests. You don't have things like poll taxes. All those types of things were abolished when the Voting Rights Act was passed back in 1965. So it's easier to have access to the ballot box, easier to vote for the candidate of choice. This past year there was a constitutional amendment passed in the state of North Carolina which will in the future require a ID, photographic ID to vote. There was a bill passed this past December 2018, that specified the types of requirements for those types of IDs. There will be, in addition to driver's licenses that can be used, in some instances, student IDs can be used.
So you have 9 proofs?
Well,
nine.
Yeah, well, they're basically about 9 different types that can be used today, including like a tribal ID if you were part of a Native American community, as a Cherokee. One could use their driver's license. One could use a card that's issued by the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles. It's an ID card. In the future, there will be actually ID cards issued by the county boards of elections in each of the 100 counties in North Carolina. That will be good for 10 years.
Because that's unique for North Carolina,
yes.
How would you invite our students to the conversation of the fact that it's still a challenge in terms of voters' rights in, say, Maryland and, say, North Carolina?
Sure.
Because your leadership depends on how we clarify that.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to remember is that since there's a constitutional right to vote, it is even truly necessary to have an ID.
Right.
The fact that an ID is being required now will potentially disenfranchise. When I say that, it means that about 300,000 people that are lawfully registered to vote today that potentially will not be able to vote in the future.
Will they be seniors? Will they be seniors that young social studies students would be able to talk to their community about how they're going to get to the polls? Or, I mean, is there any?
In some instances, it would be senior citizens. In other instances, it might be younger people. But there's a whole group of people out there that are registered to vote and lawfully registered to vote do not have IDs through traditional avenues such as driver's licenses and ID cards issued.
How much time do we really have in terms of working with that whole number of the possibility of disenfranchisement?
Don't have much time. I mean, we got about 1 year based upon an amendment that was made to the bill. There won't be an ID required in elections during 2019.
Okay.
But after 2019, beginning in 2020, there will be a need
for
to
the
have
general
ID for primaries and the general election in 2020. 2020 elections.
Okay.
The thing I will remind you is that when Governor Cooper won the governorship, he won by only about 12,000 votes. When Obama won this state in 2008, he won by about 13,000 votes.
Wow.
When he lost the state in 2012, it was by about 100,000 votes. This potential to swing 300,000 people has the potential to swing the outcome of elections. So it's important for people to get their parents, if they don't have appropriate ID, to get them IDs to vote. And when they reach an age where they're able to vote, they need to make sure they have some type of lawful ID, if it's nothing more than the ID that's issued through the Board of Elections.
The North Carolina General Assembly way back started the Founding Fathers principles, so, because it wanted feedback from students across the state in terms of education. It also started in 2001 the Student Citizenship Act. So it really welcomed social studies and civic students to write and weigh in to leaders like yourself. Is that happening enough?
It is not happening enough. They're not reaching out. They're not really proactive, engaged, or involved. And I would encourage students as well as their family members and people interested in the community to do so.
When we look at redistricting, how would you recommend social studies and civic students to begin to understand where we are in North Carolina with respect to gerrymandering and redistricting?
Remember that the census is taken every 10 years. The census will be taken again across the entire country in the year 2020. After that is taken, there's a constitutional duty to go back and redistrict to make sure districts are appropriately sized based upon the one man, one vote principle, meaning that all congressional districts need to be the same size. Legislative districts need to be within 5% plus or minus of a certain voting age population. So it will be up to the General Assembly to redistrict in the year 2021. The question is how that redistricting would occur. And when this occurred in 2011 after the 2010 census, it was done in a way that the courts determined it to be gerrymandering based upon race, meaning that race had been impermissibly used as a criteria in drawing the districts, which is not allowed unless certain background data or information is obtained or studies done that provide a reason or justification for using race. There was not that type of justification that was provided.
You presented a bill that had a redistricting map, or was it a map? Or?
Yes, I mean, I did present options back in 2011 that would have been alternative plans that would have been available for the General Assembly to have adopted other than the plans which they did adopt, which were later determined to be unconstitutional by the courts. There's also been something called political gerrymandering. In the case of our congressional districts, they were determined to be illegally drawn as being racially gerrymandered. Out of the 13 congressional districts here in this state, 10 of those were Republican districts and 3 of those were basically Democratic districts. Initially, they drew them in a way that were racially gerrymandered, packing African American voters in certain districts. They came back, were asked to redraw them based upon a court decision. They came back and used partisanship as a basis for gerrymandering. That case is still going up before the U.S. Supreme Court, which will decide whether partisanship is an appropriate factor, and if so, under what conditions it can be used, because they still have 10 Republican districts and 3 Democratic districts.
And a nonpartisan basis, student empowerment is nonprofit. Is it possible to set up the opportunity for a Republican leader and someone like yourself to just have discussion about how they weigh in, how the difference between the points of view? Is that sort of, are we at that point?
Well, I mean, I think that possibility certainly exists. I think what's been discussed and what has been adopted in some other states is rather than having the party that's in power, and when I say in power, that has the majority in the North Carolina Senate or the North Carolina House, draw the new congressional legislative districts, to put it to a bipartisan group opposed to Democrats, Republicans, and even independents that would be used to draw districts based upon a set of criteria that were established and agreed upon. That is not the approach that has been adopted and which North Carolina will be utilizing unless legislation is enacted between now and 2020, which requires that.
Senator McKissick, we really appreciate your time, and we'd love to come back after we explore all the information that you just gave us. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a privilege and honor, sir.
So.